Okay, I know it's been a long time. Everybody has been waiting patiently or impatiently, as the case may be, for me to release a new video. I've been kind of doing some real life things for a while. I won't go into detail about that stuff. That's not why you watch my content. Excuses aside, I wanted to put out another video, and this time I'm going to go over a commentary of my previous video, which was on dynamic clicking. This is going to be kind of like low effort content. I know you've waited a month and some more low effort content. Get over it. From now on, I'm going to have a little bit more time to actually put together the rest of the series that I've been wanting to put together. And of course, the next one's going to be track target switching. But as per usual, if you don't want to watch my low effort content and instead you want to wait for long form content, then go ahead and skip this video. Otherwise, let's dig straight in. I'm just going to go through all of the comments top to bottom and talk through them, assuming that it's something that I can actually talk about. So let's see here. Not only Ridd makes our aim better, he teaches us patience with the upload frequencies. Nice. Yeah, it takes a while for me to put out video. I do work full time. I'm married, blah, blah, blah. Home ownership. There's a lot of things that kind of contribute to my inability to make content as frequently as I would like to, so apologies for that, but real life takes precedence. I would say that should be true for just about anybody. Got one question: don't wait for the target, come to your crosshair thing, specifically for Pasu. On Popcorn Bounce 180, you're supposed to train your crosshair placement. Isn't that contradictory to the tip? So the biggest thing with dynamic targets, any moving targets, is you don't want to get into a bad habit where you just move your crosshair knowing the trajectory and knowing it's going to fall into it. Keep your crosshair there waiting for it to come into the reticle. I know that sounds like silly because then you're thinking, well, you know, in an FPS game, that is actually something that you want to do. Like, oftentimes that is something that you want to do. But the reason why it's mentioned in dynamic clicking is because once you start getting up in the higher speeds, that's actually going to be a limiting factor. You're going to start to hit ceilings because you are spending so much time waiting for the target to come into your crosshair. That's one thing. Another thing is that part of what you're training is learning reading skills and pattern learning and being able to micro correct onto a moving target. So if you're just constantly avoiding that technique, like of having to micro correct onto a moving target, you're basically robbing yourself of the opportunity to learn that skill. That said, somebody else here, SS Ninja, pointed out sometimes that you do want to wait for targets to come into your crosshair, and if you look at high-level aimers that do dynamic scenarios, like Dan, for example, you'll see them do that often, and that's because they are basically reading the entire map and they're looking to see what is the optimal use of their crosshair placement, and instead of moving their crosshair just to move their crosshair, they are going to passively wait for a target that they know is immediately going to fall into their crosshair. So there definitely is situations where you do want to do it, but as a general rule, when I'm helping new players understand how to do dynamic clicking, that's something that I always emphasize. Can you please make a guide on how to train overall aim, including all aspects of aiming? I'm not sure what that means, but that's kind of what I'm putting together. Edge tracking in the aim community has split opinions, and some say tracking in the center of a bot gives better mouse control, where edge tracking is best for Kovaaks tracking. A good video to go into depth about. So this isn't really related to dynamic clicking. In case people aren't aware what edge tracking is, it's basically the idea that if you know a bot is going to be in a tracking scenario, if you know a bot is going to be frequently changing direction, kind of like AD spamming, it uses less of your mouse movement. It's less wasteful in your mouse movement to follow the bot through the entire duration of its movements. So you kind of anticipate a little bit the fact that it is going to be frequently moving back and forth. I think even Aimer7 talks about this in one of his original guides, where if somebody's like super AD spamming, it makes a lot of sense just to keep your crosshair right in the middle of where they're AD spamming, because you're essentially always going to be shooting them, and they're putting in a lot of effort to strafe very quickly. The scenarios like Fugla XYZ is a pretty prominent use of edge tracking to maximize your scores. Something we'll go into once I get to tracking, specifically reactive tracking. Please activate scenario names and UI settings. Okay, so and in general, I do value feedback. So if you have feedback like this, even if it's just something small, like, hey, can you turn on the scenario names? Please share that. I'm always trying to make my videos better. So this is, even these little things matter. Okay, they're asking about how they can contact me to comment on videos and VODs. You can hit me up on Discord. My Discord name, I think I have it added to my socials, and if I don't, then I'll add it. That's probably the best way to get in touch with me. I'm on there pretty much every day after work. Here it is right here. And I don't mind doing VOD review every now and then. Just know, I have other things that I might want to be doing, so I don't have time to just, coach you, and I'm probably not even that great of a coach. Okay, nice fit. I have a question. You said it is best to hit the balls while they're at the highest point. Doesn't it make more sense you want to hit the balls in every position because it trains more mechanically? And I think I know what they're getting at. They're basically saying, like, if you're trying to aim train and for an FPS game, and if you're just constantly shooting a target when it's at its most viable, when it's at its most, at the apex of its jump, in this case for like bounce 180, aren't you robbing yourself of the opportunity of hitting a target when it's at the worst place to hit it, right? So like the idea is, like, you want to train for scenarios that you're bad at, or that, because in game you're not going to control where the target is, and you might need to shoot them in a very suboptimal way. So I can understand that concept. I still think that you want to be focusing on hitting the targets when they're at their most viable, when they're at the peak. And it doesn't mean that you never shoot non-viable targets. It's hard to explain, but you start to get into a tempo. And I mean, remember, you are still, aside from training mechanics, you are trying to get a good score in the scenario that you're playing. You kind of like zone out, and like you're able to, because you're reading the map, and because you're seeing kind of the targets in your peripheral vision, and you know where you're going to go next. You're definitely going to be shooting at targets that aren't at the peak of their jump, because you need to keep shooting at targets. Like, you need to constantly have an uptime where you're killing things, right? It doesn't make sense, I guess, for you to purposefully go after targets when they're at their least viable, just to like train for that circumstance. Like, you're basically gonna gain that skill passively as you're trying to shoot for the targets at their most viable. Just want to ask you, ever do an in-depth video about Microshoot scenarios? I mean, to me, that's microflicks, which is static, which is what I've covered in the static video. So if you want to get info on Microshoot scenarios, hip fire type scenarios, check my static vid. You mentioned that you shouldn't be waiting for targets to cross your cursor, and for the most part, this is correct, but a large part of the scenario is that right after shooting a target, you should be reading the movements of targets surrounding your cursor crosshair and pick out which ones are actually moving toward your crosshair. Moving your crosshair into the path and clicking on time is a huge part of it. And so, yeah, that's what I talked about before. Strive Sensei, I think, is SSJ Ninja as well. That's who I was referring to. Basically, that's correct. Like, a big part of dynamic clicking is reading the map. What I talked about in the video was reading the map, and there are times when the most optimal thing to minimize waste is to wait for the target to come in your crosshair. It's just not something that you should train for, if that makes sense. Should I practice any routine 2 times my sends for half the exercise and the other half with the normal sends I use? This is a common thing. A lot of people do this. They'll just train with a higher sensitivity. Basically, what you're doing is you're increasing the difficulty, because The higher your sensitivity, essentially, the more jitter becomes apparent, the more mouse control you kind of need. I wouldn't say it has to exactly be half or double or whatever. Like you see a lot of Twitter posts, especially from Aimer7, where he talks about that. There's no science to it. It's not like you need to exactly double your sens. Just increase your sens if you want to increase the difficulty. Tracking might be much better than the static clicking stuff. I'm binge watching. Okay. So I just replied to this, so it's fresh. It's really common for people to have specifically one dimension of their aiming that is better than others. Like if you're always playing Apex, your tracking and reactive tracking is probably going to be better than anything else. If you're playing COD, your target switching is probably going to be better. If you're playing games like CS, your static's probably going to be better. Like that's just because you have to learn to aim when you're playing those games, and those games emphasize certain types of aiming mechanics over others. So I wouldn't stress about it. I would say it's almost always beneficial to develop a full aim profile. There's probably very specialized reasons if you are like competitive where you might not want to focus on the overall aim profile and instead specialize in one dimension. But I mean, if you're at that point, like aim is probably not your weakest point in your overall effectiveness to be competitive. So should I be doing routines, i.e. fundamental voltaic, and she's specific before that? I actually missed this one. I didn't reply to it. I think so. Like, I think there's a lot of benefit to doing routines. I think people overemphasize routines as well. More important than the routine you're doing or the scenario you're playing is how you are training and how you're spending your time, how you're focusing on what you're doing wrong and how you can improve it actively. Those are very important. Those are probably the most important concepts associated. Doing a lot of reps is very important. There's some routines that are generally more effective than others, but most people will benefit just from playing routines. It helps you be engaged. It helps keep it interesting. It helps you stick to a habit, but you don't need to do routines. Some people can just totally spam scenarios that they like and they'll be totally fine. Just do what works for you. There's no reason to just, if you're not doing routines, to do them. If it's working for you, not doing routines. Okay, this is a video, this is a comment. I know it sounds off, but I find it hard to transfer the skills I learned in Aimlab or Kovaaks to a game. I end up flicking and shooting right after instead of lining up a shot and being more careful like I would in an aim trainer. So, and I have an entire video, it's an hour long, on why your in-game or why your aim training may not translate directly to FPS games that you're playing. There's a lot of reasons, and I won't go into detail because I go into incredible detail in that video, but there's a lot of filters that don't allow your aim mechanics to be the number one most important thing that is the result between winning and losing or being successful or being less successful. One of the things that I always suggest is, like, if you're aim training and you're actively focusing on what you're doing wrong or what you need to improve on, like, let's say that you're really bad at overflicking and you know it because you've looked at your VODs, and when you're doing your static scenarios and routines, you're consciously thinking about it, about how much you're overflicking and trying to pull that back, right? Like, do the same thing in your FPS game. Like, if you know, like in this example, you said flicking and shooting right after instead of lining up a shot and being more careful. If you know that you're doing that, you know that's your problem in the game while you're in fights, think about that. Think about that one thing. You know, it's an incremental improvement. Like, you don't have to think about every single thing every single time. Give your brain time to adjust, but maybe one day, like, just think of that one thing. Like, when you're in fights, is to give yourself the time to line up a shot, you know, instead of just like quickly flicking and shooting and then missing. Like, if you do that, like, you basically train to improve in your game, just like you train to improve in the aim trainer. So the skills that you acquire to get better technique in aim trainer, you can use those same skills to get better technique in your FPS game. Anyone knows how to install the playlist? So I did provide the share code, and it's not beta anymore now. It's in the full release, is the share codes, which are really cool. The thing I like about the share codes is that the author can edit the playlist after the share codes have been provided, and then people can just download the new version. So if you change it up a little bit now and then people will just constantly get the updates. You share your visual themes. No, I can. Maybe I'll add it to this video. I added somebody by the name of Lapu4 is like a grandmaster with like 2,700 hours. I've been using their themes, which I think are pretty cool. When should I stop aim training? Is it useful for Overwatch? So that's going to be totally context dependent. I'd say, like, most people should take a good look at their aim training and how effective it is when they're getting more frustrated in their FPS games than they are in aim trainer, because it's basically like your brain telling you, oh, I need to remap myself to get better at the FPS game, and then just kind of maybe reduce the amount of time that you're spending on the aim training and spending more time on the FPS games. And of course, it always depends on what your goals are. If you really want to be good at FPS games, I would say you want to be spending most of your time training inside of the FPS game, because there's so many other ancillary skills that are required to be good at FPS games other than your aim. That's another thing, is like people like to zone in and focus overly much on how good their mechanical aim is, because it's something that they can control and that they can invest in by themselves. But there might be a lot of things like communications and teamwork and predicting and rotations, that is way more important in the FPS game that you need to practice. Is aim training useful for Overwatch? I would say absolutely. Overwatch has probably one of the highest uptime demand for aiming, because of like how many players are on screen at any given time, how many enemies are on screen at any given time, how long the TTK can be, because there's so many healing abilities and like shield abilities to prevent people from dying. So yeah, definitely aim training is useful for Overwatch. Let's go. Thumbnail is accurate. Where do I get the playlist? I already talked about that. Dynamic clicking is so hard, in my opinion. It really is. Like, dynamic clicking is, I'd say, in terms of difficulty, reactive tracking is the hardest for pretty much everybody, and then dynamic clicking is the second hardest, because of the amount of mouse control that's required. And it's got like a linear progression of difficulty. And like, if you're doing fine at Pasu, like with big bots, big slow bots, like if you just decrease the size by 25%, it becomes way harder. Like, and if it gets down to like the really small, like Pasu small reload, it gets so much more difficult. Like, and the amount of like hair trigger, like mouse control that you need just gets way up there. So it's one of those things, like the more time you invest in it, like the better your aim will get. Like, it's very good for your overall aim, mechanical aim improvement. Could I get an Astro score? Hell no. Like, and it's funny because I just read a Twitter post from somebody who kind of said something along the same lines, like coaches or people that train or like mentor don't necessarily need to be at the peak of mechanical skill in order to be effective at it. I kind of see myself as being, intermediate skill level. I don't have as much time to invest in training as other people do for a lot of reasons. I've seen people in 6 months get triple the amount of time invested in Kovaaks that I've had over 3 years. It's no excuse, of course. I mean, it's what you value spending your time on. And then, there'll be people who are really mechanically skilled, but just aren't good at teaching people. Like the skill of being able to take something that you understand and then being able to put it into some kind of framework that other people can understand it is by itself extremely difficult. And I've been fortunate enough over the years to be involved in a lot of different like jobs and work related things that have required me to do a lot of coaching. So I've gotten pretty good at it. Can't wait for the tracking. That is coming up. I love tracking. That's my favorite. What will number 4 be? Number 4, well, 3, I guess 3 technically, because 3 is going to be, oh, I see. Because I did the static and then I did the commentary. I'm doing dynamic and then the commentary. So the next main video is going to be track target switching. All my homies hate Pasu. Yes, they do. I have no idea. Cata IC fast strafe invis is dog. Okay. Like, my main problem is making clean straight lines and flicks. I've hit plat on the benchmarks. Can't say I'm happy. I don't know if my technique is thoroughly correct or if I ended up cutting corners. I mean, that's a good point. Like, on a surface, it's better to be a rank complete versus just hopping up to the next rank. Like, so instead of getting plat, so you have like one of each plat score for each scenario type, you should try to get plat for all of the scenario types before you start attacking diamond type scores. But and overall, like, benchmarks are a good way to stay motivated and stay interested, because you get dopamine. Dopamine isn't just a reward, but it's also a motivator, like chemical. So it's important to maintain those levels of dopamine. And if you get that from doing your benchmarks and seeing higher scores, that's great. But to the degree that you can invest time in related scenarios that focus on technique versus just getting benchmark scores, I would encourage you to do that and prioritize that. A lot of people don't recognize that benchmarks aren't necessarily like the best, most optimal scenarios to learn technique or to hone your technique, but a lot of them were chosen specifically to minimize cheesing and minimize randomness, which aren't good for benchmarks, because you want 1 full minute, or however long the scenario is. If it's something like air, you want 1 full minute knowing that you're not going to get this crazy cluster of bots that's just going to suddenly make your score way higher just because you got lucky, right? So that's the main concept behind benchmarks, aside from being big, groups of aim mechanics that are effective. Like 114 TS is fantastic, Pasu's fantastic, Popcorn's fantastic, but it's really centered around minimizing randomness. How close are you to reaching diamond complete? I just started doing the Aimlab ones, voltaic ones, just for giggles, and I got diamond on everything except dynamic. That's like the one thing I'm still working on, but I also don't really run benchmarks. TunesClick. Oh, I hate TunesClick. I hate Pasu. Don't even. Okay. Well, that's pretty much all the comments. I did get other comments on other videos, but I wanted to focus the comments for this one on my on the actual video that I released, which was dynamic clicking. So I don't want to waste your time anymore. I do appreciate you being patient while I put together the rest of my content. I'm definitely still active. I'm still interested. I want to finish this series. I've also kicked around the idea of streaming again. I haven't streamed in a while. I might actually start streaming this interactive session. So if that's something you want to see, give me feedback on the video, because maybe then I could do more of like a live comment session for the content purposes instead of just reading my comments. But like I said, thank you again for listening. Make sure you like the video, subscribe, share to people, and follow me on Twitter. That's where I'm most active if you want to get the latest and greatest of what's going on. Check out the PhorHead Discord. I'm on the PhorHead Discord now, and I'm part of PhorHead, the AIM group. So if you want to interact with me one-on-one and other great aimers, actually everybody there is like 20 times better than I'll ever be, but there's a lot of good discussion and resources, kicking up some of the resources in GitHub and stuff. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff coming down the pipe. I'm not going to waste your time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.